The letter was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from work, and even before I touched it, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't sealed. My husband never left anything unsealed. He was the kind of man who color-coded his tax files and kept a spreadsheet of every oil change the car had ever had. An unsealed envelope on the counter addressed to no one meant it had been left there deliberately. It meant he wanted me to find it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 4 sentences. He'd found the messages on my old iPad, the one I thought I'd wiped, the one I left at the back of the closet shelf after I bought the new one. The messages between me and my coworker. The messages between me and my coworker. The messages from 2 years before we got married. I read it 4 times, standing in the kitchen with my coat still on. Then I folded it up, put it back in the envelope, and sat down at the table. I didn't move for a long time. He came home at 7:30, same as always. He put his keys on the hook. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He asked me if I was hungry, and I said no. He made himself a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter reading something on his phone. Then he went upstairs. He didn't look at me once. That was 22 months ago, and he hasn't really looked at me since. I want to try to explain what happened, but I know how it sounds before I even start. I know what you're thinking because I've thought it myself 1,000 times. There's no version of this story where I come out looking good. I accepted that a long time ago. But I've been carrying this alone for almost 2 years now, and I think I need to just say it out loud. All of it. I met my husband at 24 at one of those company kickball leagues that seemed like a good idea when the HR department organized it and immediately felt embarrassing once you were actually there. He was on the opposing team and he was terrible at kickball, like genuinely, spectacularly bad, and he laughed at himself every single time. I had never met a man who was so completely unbothered by not being good at something. Most of the guys I dated up until then were so concerned with looking capable, looking smooth, looking like they had everything figured out. He just laughed. He laughed and ran the wrong direction and then laughed again. I was absolutely gone for him by the 3rd inning. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He took me to the restaurant on the lake where we'd had our first real dinner. The one with the white tablecloths and the bread that came warm, and he got down on one knee between the appetizer and the entree, and the whole restaurant applauded. It was cheesy, and I cried, and I said yes before he'd even gotten the question fully out of his mouth. That was when I was 26. The person I'm about to tell you about, I'd met him at work 6 months before the engagement. He was a contractor brought in on a project I was managing, smart and funny and completely inappropriate for me in every way I could have listed. I knew it even then. I want to be clear that I knew. It started as lunches, then longer lunches, then one evening, staying late at the office to finish a deliverable, and somewhere in that evening, it became something it was never supposed to be. It happened 4 times over 3 months. I ended it the week my husband proposed. I told myself it was over, that it had never been serious, that it was something I'd never do again. I convinced myself it hadn't counted the way it actually counted. I was 26 years old and I was very good at convincing myself of things. We got married the following spring. It was a Saturday in April at my grandmother's church outside of Columbus, and the peonies were blooming, and my father cried walking me down the aisle, and my husband's face when he saw me. That face, I have thought about that face more in the last 2 years than in the previous 4. He looked at me like I was the only thing in the room that was real. I didn't tell him. I should have. I know, I didn't. We built a life. That's what I keep coming back to. We actually built something. A house in a neighborhood with good schools, even though we didn't have kids yet, because he was already thinking ahead. A dog named after a baseball player. A tradition of homemade pizza on Sunday nights, where we'd pick a region of Italy and spend an embarrassing amount of time arguing over whether the sauce was right. Friday movie night. A savings account for the trip to Japan we'd been planning for 3 years. A rhythm that felt like the truest thing I'd ever been a part of. I thought about it sometimes. The thing I'd done before. It would surface occasionally, usually when something good happened. When we closed on the house. When he held my hand at his father's funeral. When I found out I was pregnant with our daughter. I'd feel the familiar pull of guilt. The old question, should I tell him? And every time I talked myself back down, what was done was done. It would only hurt him. It was over. It was nothing. Our daughter was born when I was 29. She had her father's laugh from about 4 months in, this big, open-mouthed cackle that made everyone around her laugh too. And watching the two of them together was the kind of thing that made me understand why people say their lives didn't start until they had kids. I understood it every single day. She was 2.5 when I got pregnant again. I had a miscarriage at 11 weeks. We didn't tell many people. My husband took a week off work, and he didn't leave my side, not once. He slept on the bathroom floor with me when I couldn't get comfortable anywhere. He made appointments and drove me to them, and sat in the waiting rooms even when they said he couldn't come back. I remember thinking, somewhere in those awful weeks, that I didn't deserve him. Not as criticism, just as fact. By the time our daughter was 4, the life we'd made felt solid in a way I'd stopped questioning. I'd buried the old things so deep, I almost didn't feel it anymore. Almost. I had bought that iPad a couple of years earlier for a home project. I'd used it for a few months and then switched back to my laptop, and the iPad ended up in the closet. I thought I'd deleted everything when I got the new one. I thought I'd been thorough. I thought a lot of things. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that the old messages had synced to the cloud backup before I wiped the device, and when my husband borrowed the iPad to look something up one afternoon while his own phone was charging, something he'd done a dozen times before, the messages had resynced. I don't know exactly how. He never explained it to me, and I never had the courage to ask. But they were there. All of them. Team stamped from 2 months before our engagement. I found the letter on a Tuesday in October. Our daughter was at my mother's for the week for fall break. It was just the two of us in the house, which in retrospect I think was not an accident. The days that followed were the strangest of my life. He continued to exist in the house. He paid bills and brought in the mail and walked the dog in the mornings and evenings like always. He slept in our bed. He didn't sleep on the couch, didn't stay with anyone, didn't change anything observable about his daily routine. But he didn't speak to me unless it was absolutely necessary, and when he did, his voice was completely level, flat, like a piece of glass. I tried in the first week to talk to him. I sat across from him at the dinner table, and I said his name, and I said I was sorry, and I said I wanted to explain, and he looked up from his plate and looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in days, and what I saw on his face was not anger. It wasn't even hurt, not exactly. It was something more like exhaustion, the kind that goes all the way down. I know, he said, and he went back to his dinner. I didn't know what he knew or how much of it. I still don't, fully. That's the thing about silence. It doesn't give you anything to argue against. There's no accusation to respond to. There's no explosion to weather and then recover from. There's just the absence of everything that used to be there. My mother knew something was wrong within 2 weeks. She noticed on a phone call. I've always been a bad liar with her, even on the phone. And she asked me point blank if my marriage was okay. I told her we were going through a rough patch. She accepted that with the particular dignity of a woman who knows her daughter isn't telling her the whole truth and has decided to wait. My younger sister was harder to put off. She lives 40 minutes away, and she came over one Saturday afternoon when my husband was at a job site, and she sat down on my couch and said, "You look like you haven't slept in a month. What is happening?" Not a question, a statement. I started to give her the rough patch line, and I couldn't finish it. I sat down next to her and I put my face in my hands and I told her everything. The coworker, the timeline, the iPad, the letter, the weeks of silence, all of it. She didn't say anything for a long time. "Did he know him?" she finally asked. "The guy from work?" "No, they never met." She nodded slowly. "Does he know when it stopped?" "I don't know what he knows. He won't talk to me." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Are you still in love with your husband?" "Yes," I said. I didn't have to think about it for even a second. "Does he know that?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. The silence stretched into months. 3 months. Then 4. Our daughter came home from my mother's and slid back into her routines. Preschool and swim lessons and the stuffed elephant she took everywhere. And to her, the house probably looked completely normal. We were careful around her. We spoke to each other about her schedule, her needs, her pediatrician appointments. We sat together at her preschool's Thanksgiving performance, and I have a photograph from that day of the 3 of us, and we look like any other family. We look fine. I found a therapist in November. Not couples therapy. He never agreed to that, never responded when I left the therapist card on his nightstand. Individual therapy, an older woman with a very calm voice and a plant that I thought was fake for the first 6 sessions, until I noticed she'd watered it. I sat in her office every other Thursday and I tried to become someone who could live with what I'd done. "What do you want from him?" she asked me once early on. "I wasn't him to be angry," I said. "I want him to yell at me. I want him to say whatever he needs to say, and I want to sit there and take it. And then I want us to figure out what comes next." She looked at me with her very calm expression. "And what if what comes next for him doesn't include you?" I didn't answer that one either. The first real conversation happened 7 months in. I was making dinner and I dropped a pan and it made a crash that brought him out of the office. And when he came into the kitchen doorway, I just started talking. I said I didn't expect forgiveness. I said I wasn't asking for it. I said I knew what I'd done, and I knew it had been a betrayal not just of what we were when it happened, but of everything we built after. I said I'd been living with it for years before he found out, and the weight of it had been mine to carry, and I'd carried it badly, and I was sorry. Not the sorry that's really asking for something, but the sorry that means I genuinely understand I caused harm. He stood in the doorway the whole time. He didn't move. When I stopped talking, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have never cheated on you." "I know," I said. "In 11 years, I have never once." "I know that." He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved in his face that I couldn't read. Then he went back to the office and closed the door. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first time in 7 months that I felt like he'd heard me. The months after that were incremental. That's the only word. Incremental. He would occasionally eat dinner at the table with me instead of at his desk. He mentioned something a coworker had said that had annoyed him. He started watching the same TV show I was watching from the other end of the couch. He let the dog sleep between us again instead of insisting she stay on the floor. None of it was reconciliation, but it was also not nothing. I want to tell you something about watching someone grieve you. Because that's what it was. It was grief. He was grieving the version of our marriage he thought he'd had, the version where I had come to him clean, where the whole story was the one we told together. That version was gone. He was mourning it the way you mourn something that never gets a funeral, no ceremony, no casseroles from the neighbors, just a long and private silence. I learned to let him mourn. That was maybe the most important thing therapy gave me. Not language to fix it, or tools to speed it up, but permission to sit with the fact that his grief was not mine to manage. I had caused it. I could not also control it. Our daughter turned 5 in the spring. He threw her a birthday party, the full production, homemade cake, pinned the tail on the donkey, little favor bags he'd stayed up until midnight the night before assembling because he'd found a craft idea on YouTube, and he always goes all in on her birthday. I stood in our backyard watching him push her on the tire swing, and I thought about all the ways a person can be held together and broken at the same time. 14 months after the letter on the counter, he knocked on the door of the home office. I'd started using it as my room, sleeping in there some nights when the distance in our bed felt like too much. It was a Sunday morning. I was reading. He said, "I've been talking to someone, a therapist of his own. He'd been going for about 2 months. I'm glad," I said. He sat down in the armchair across from me, his chair actually, the one he'd had since his first apartment that I'd always thought was ugly, and he'd always refused to replace. He looked at it for a minute, then at me. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know if there's a way to do this." "I don't either," I said. "But I don't want to keep doing the other thing." I understood what he meant by the other thing. The flat voice, the absence, the life that looked like a life from the outside and felt like a hallway from the inside. "What do you want?" I asked him. My therapist's question. I'd been saving it without knowing it. He was quiet for a long time. "I want to know if it's possible to actually trust you again. Not just decide to trust you. Actually feel it." "I don't know if it is," I said. "Neither do I." He sat there for another minute. Then he asked if I wanted to take the dog for a walk. And I said yes. And we walked around the block and then around it again, and the dog was beside herself with excitement about going twice, and he told me about a problem at work he'd been turning over in his head, and I told him about a conversation with my sister that had made me laugh. And by the time we got back to the front door, we were talking. Not performing talking. Actually talking. It wasn't fixed. I want to be clear that it wasn't fixed. But it was the first day I could see, barely, from very far off, some version of a future. We've been in couples therapy for 3 months now. A man in his 50s with an office above a dry cleaner downtown, very no-nonsense, occasionally funny in a dry way that we both appreciate. He doesn't let either of us be vague. My husband has sat in that office and said things to me that were hard to hear and true, and I have sat there and said things that cost me something to say. It is slow and uncomfortable, and some sessions I drive home feeling like I've been scraped clean. My daughter is 5.5 now. She knows her parents have been going to talk appointments. She asked me once why we go to appointments to talk when we have a whole house full of rooms to talk in, and I told her that sometimes it helps to have someone else there to help you listen better. And she considered this very seriously and said, "Like a referee." And I said, "Yes, actually, exactly like a referee." I don't know how this ends. I mean that. I genuinely do not know whether my husband and I will still be married in 5 years, whether the thing that was broken can be made into something that holds. My therapist says the goal isn't to restore what was there before, because what was there before had a lie underneath it. The goal, if there is one, is to build something new on ground that's actually honest. I don't know if we can do that. Some days in that office above the dry cleaner, I think we might be able to. Some days I drive home and I cry in the parking garage before I go upstairs. But I know this. I stopped lying. I stopped managing the story. I stopped being the person who buries things in the back of a closet shelf and tells herself it doesn't matter. That person caused so much damage. To my husband, to the version of our marriage he deserved to have, to myself in ways I'm still finding. I am 32 years old. I have a daughter who laughs like her father. I have a dog who needs to go around the block twice. I have a husband who is sitting in an office above a dry cleaner every other week trying to decide whether I am worth the effort. I think about that face he made when he saw me at the end of the aisle. I think about it and I hold it and I don't let myself use it as comfort because I don't get to do that. But I keep it. I keep it because it tells me who he is, what kind of love he was prepared to give. I didn't honor that the way I should have, and I have to live with that every day. What I can do, what I am trying to do, is make sure that the woman he sees now is someone who actually deserves to be seen. I keep thinking about that unsealed envelope on the kitchen counter. He could have left it anywhere, on my pillow, on my desk, slipped it under the bathroom door. But he left it in the kitchen, the room where we made dinner together every night for years. I think that was intentional, even if he never said so. Even in the worst moment of our marriage, he put it somewhere I couldn't miss it, but also somewhere ordinary, somewhere we had been normal. The hardest thing I've had to accept is that what happened to us wasn't a sudden accident. It was the result of a choice I made at 26 and then kept making every day I didn't tell him the truth. That's what I mean when I say consequences don't always arrive on schedule. Sometimes they wait quietly in a cloud back up for years. Sometimes the thing you buried comes up through the floor when you least expect it, and by then it has grown into something much larger than it was when you first tried to hide it. I thought I was protecting him. I was protecting myself. There's a difference, and for a long time I confused the two. What I've had to learn, slowly in a therapist's office, and then more slowly in a couples therapist's office above a dry cleaner, is that honesty isn't just about not lying. It's about having the courage to sit with something uncomfortable instead of burying it. I didn't have that courage at 26. I'm not sure I fully had it at 30. I'm trying to build it now, late, imperfectly, in real time. My husband watches me do it. He doesn't applaud it, and I don't expect him to. It's just the minimum of what I owe him. There's also something I didn't expect, which is that sitting with the truth, really sitting with it, not managing it or softening it or explaining it away, actually makes you smarter about yourself. I understand now why I made the choices I made at 26, not to excuse them, to see them clearly. I was someone who was terrified of disruption, who had confused keeping the peace with being good. I had never learned that the most important kind of honesty is the kind that costs you something, and that gap in my understanding cost my husband years he can't get back. The part that takes the most out of me is the part about endurance, not dramatic endurance, not suffering dramatically for a redemption arc. I mean the quiet kind, getting up and going to the appointment, sitting in the chair across from my husband when it's hard, not running from the version of myself he now sees clearly. That kind of endurance doesn't feel noble when you're in it. It just feels like the only remaining honest option. My daughter asked me once why grown-ups cry. I told her sometimes you feel something so big it needs somewhere to go. She thought about it for a second and said, like when the cup is too full. And I said yes, exactly like that. I let my cup get too full for too long, and when it finally spilled, it got on everyone around me. All I can do now is keep showing up, keep being someone worth trusting, not perform it. Actually be it, one ordinary day at a time.